Everyone in the fashion industry knows you don't cross Dominic Vance. He controls the Chicago skyline, speaks in a low, terrifying baritone, and can ruin a career with a single phone call. I always kept my distance, maintaining perfect professional decorum as a senior designer. Until yesterday, when my assistant didn't just steal my entire winter couture collection, he patented it under his name, destroyed my digital backups, and filed a restraining order against me, claiming I was his obsessive stalker. The board believed his tears. Security was escorting me out of the building in handcuffs when the private elevator doors opened. Dominic Vance walked out, flanked by 6 bodyguards. He didn't just stop the police. He looked the board dead in the eye and said, "The collection belongs to him, and if you touch my fiancé again, I will liquidate this entire company by midnight." I was completely frozen. I wasn't his fiancé. We had only been on 3 secret dates. But looking at my assistant's face turned completely white, I realized the most dangerous man in Chicago had just stepped in to burn down the world for me. I need you to understand something about the way I work. I am not loud. I do not throw tantrums in the fitting room. I do not clip my words when I'm frustrated or make sharp remarks to the junior staff when a seam allowance comes back wrong. I became a senior designer at Maison Averly, one of the last true couture houses operating out of Chicago's Magnificent Mile, by being meticulous, calm, and relentless. 12 years of treating every bolt of fabric like a conversation, every collection like a declaration, the kind of discipline that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just shows up every morning before anyone else arrives. Julian Hart arrived at my desk 11 months ago, fresh out of the Chicago Art Institute with a portfolio full of bold ideas and the kind of eager energy that reminded me of myself a decade earlier. He asked smart questions. He stayed late without being asked. He learned how I organized my sketchbooks, the colored index tabs, the tissue paper overlays, the way I dated each concept page in the lower right corner. I thought he was building a foundation. He was building a case. The Winter Couture Lookbook presentation was scheduled for the first Thursday in October, with the entire Averly board present, along with 3 international buyers and 2 editorial directors from major fashion publications. I had spent 6 months on this collection. 6 months of research, of sourcing, of 14-hour days with pins in my fingers and charcoal dust on my wrists. The theme was architectural restraint. Clean Midwestern severity paired with the softness of hand-stitched ivory silk. Every piece was mine, down to the decision to use matte buttons instead of polished ones on the final 3 looks. I arrived at the glass-walled presentation suite on the 14th floor at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the board was due to be seated. I heard voices already inside. I opened the door. Julian was standing at the display wall. My sketches were on the easels. Not copies, my originals, matted and framed with the tissue overlays removed. He was mid-sentence, gesturing at the 3rd look with the easy confidence of someone who had been presenting for years. The board was watching him with measured approval. I said, "Julian." The room went quiet. He turned, and what happened to his face in that moment, I have played it back 100 times since. It wasn't surprise. It was a brief, calculated recalibration. Then his expression crumbled, and he took a step back, and his voice dropped into something that sounded genuinely frightened. He knew I would come. "Please, don't do this here." I did not raise my voice. Those are my designs. I need everyone to understand that clearly. The board shifted. I saw Margaret Holloway, our director of brand affairs, place her hand very deliberately on the table. Julian looked at the room with wide, wet eyes. He reached into a leather folder, my leather folder, I registered, the one that had gone missing from my office 3 weeks ago, and produced a stack of documents, printed HR logs with timestamps, screenshots of what looked like my phone numbers sending threatening text messages, a formal restraining order, already stamped, bearing a Cook County case number. He's been following me. Julian's voice breaking exactly on schedule, taking things from my trash, showing up outside my apartment. I thought I could handle it quietly, but he walked in here today and He didn't walk in. Margaret said slowly, looking at me with something between pity and protective alarm. "He works here." "He used to." "He used to," Julian said. That was when I understood the full architecture of what he had built. It wasn't a theft, it was a demolition with legal scaffolding around it, designed to make me look like the one who had come unhinged. The restraining order made me the aggressor. The fake texts made me obsessive. The HR logs, which I would later learn were generated using a spoofed internal system, made me look like I had a pattern of hostile conduct. He had patented the collection through a shell LLC 3 weeks prior, under the name Julian Hart Designs, predating any record of my involvement that he had been careful, methodically careful, to erase. I stood very still while the board exchanged glances. I thought about speaking again, about pulling out my own sketchbooks, my dated drafts, the email chains with our fabric suppliers in New York. But Margaret was already on her phone. 2 of the buyers looked away. The editorial directors studied the floor. "We have to protect the company from liability," Margaret said, not meeting my eyes. "Until this is resolved legally." "You're asking me to leave?" "Security will escort you downstairs." "On what grounds?" "There's a valid restraining order, which means Julian cannot be required to share a workspace with you." "I'm sorry. You'll receive a formal notice by end of day." 2 men in building security uniforms appeared at the door. One of them asked me, quietly and with some decency, to come with them. I thought about fighting. My hands were steady. My breathing was controlled. I walked. They did not put cuffs on me until we reached the lobby because someone, I never learned who, had called the Chicago PD. An officer was already there. They told me there were additional charges being prepared, criminal harassment. They said the word stalking very calmly. The officer told me to keep my hands visible and not to make a scene. I stood in the lobby of the building I had worked in for 9 years, in handcuffs, while the morning foot traffic of the Magnificent Mile moved past the glass doors outside. A woman walking by with a coffee cup glanced in and looked away. A messenger held the door open for someone and let it swing shut. The world outside was completely indifferent, and that indifference was its own particular weight to carry on top of everything else. The officer told me to remain calm. I was calm. I had never been anything other than calm, and somehow that was the loneliest part of the whole morning. I was not going to cry. I want to be clear about that. Not because I wasn't devastated, I was, but I had given 12 years of my life to this industry with complete integrity, and I was not going to let Julian Hart or a Cook County restraining order take the last thing I had left, my composure. That was when the private elevator opened. Dominic Vance does not walk into rooms. He arrives in them, the way a drop in barometric pressure arrives before a major storm. You feel the change in the air before you see him. 6'3", dark suit with no pocket square, the kind of face that looks like it was made for delivering bad news. He had 4 bodyguards flanking him and 2 more holding the elevator. His attorney, a woman named Claire Sudden, who I recognized from the industry gossip circuits, was 1 step behind him with a tablet already open. He saw me in handcuffs and stopped. The 2 security officers, the Chicago PD officer, and every board member who had followed us to the lobby, Margaret included, went very still. Dominic looked at the officer's hand on my arm. Then he looked at Margaret. His voice was exactly what everyone says it is: low, unhurried, and capable of carrying the weight of finality in every syllable. "Take the cuffs off." The officer started. "Sir, there is a valid order." "There is a valid order that my company's legal team is currently pulling apart at the courthouse." He looked at Margaret. "And you," a pause that lasted exactly long enough to make her visibly uncomfortable. "The collection belongs to him, and if you touch my fiancé again, I will liquidate this entire company by midnight." The lobby did not breathe. Julian, who had apparently followed us downstairs with the confidence of someone who thought the day was already won, went the color of unprimed canvas. The officer removed the handcuffs. Dominic did not look at me yet. He said 3 words to Claire, "File the motion," and she was already moving. He told one of the bodyguards to escort me to the vehicle. Then, only then, did he glance at me. 1 second. No expression I could fully read, but there was something in it that steadied me, the way a fixed point on the horizon steadies you when the ground is moving. I walked out of the building. In the back of his car, an armored black Escalade with tinted windows and a partition between us and the driver, he sat across from me and said nothing for almost 2 full minutes. I let the silence hold. It was a habit I had developed around him. "You didn't call me," he said finally. I didn't know it had gotten to that point until I was already in the lobby. He nodded once, like that was an acceptable answer, even though it wasn't the one he wanted. I need to explain what we were to each other, because the word fiancé had been deployed in that lobby like a detonator, and the truth was considerably more quiet and more complicated than that. 3 months earlier, Dominic Vance had come to Averly for a quarterly holdings review. His conglomerate, Vance Capital Group, owned the parent company that funded Averly, along with 6 other luxury brands across North America. He sat in on the design preview I presented that day, not at the main table, but in a chair near the back, jacket off, arms crossed, watching in a way that was hard to read. After the room cleared, he asked me one question about the fabric sourcing for the third piece, a technical question, specific. The kind of question someone asks when they have actually been paying attention. I answered it. He listened. He left. 2 weeks later, his assistant reached out to schedule what was described as an informal debrief. I expected a corporate conference room. He sent a car to a jazz club called Blue Room in the West Loop, the kind of place that does not advertise and where the lighting is kept low on purpose. He was already there when I arrived, in a dark blazer and no tie, which I later realized was as relaxed as Dominic Vance ever looks in public. The musician on stage was playing something slow and searching, and we sat at a corner table and talked, really talked, for 3 hours, about the industry, about the compression of craft under commercial pressure, about what it meant to build something that lasted. At one point, he said, very quietly, "You don't talk like someone who's trying to impress anyone." I said, "Neither do you." That was the first date. Neither of us called it that out loud. The second was at his penthouse on the 48th floor of the Vance Tower, overlooking the lake. He cooked, and I did not expect that. A simple meal, nothing elaborate, and we sat at a kitchen island the size of a small runway. I talked about the winter collection, about the specific weight of the silk I had sourced from a mill in Paterson, New Jersey, and why the drape behaved differently depending on the humidity of the room. He listened with the kind of focused attention that most people reserve for things they stand to profit from financially. But there was nothing transactional about it. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered details from the previous conversation and connected them. When I left that night, he walked me to the elevator, and his hand rested on the door for a moment before he let it close. He said, "Next time." Not a question. I thought about that for a week. Now in the back of his car, with the Chicago skyline moving past the windows, and my wrists still bearing the faint red marks from the handcuffs, I looked at him. "We're not engaged," I said. "No," he agreed. "You said it in front of a police officer, the board, 2 editorial directors, and whatever security footage is going to surface from that lobby by end of day." "Yes." "That's a significant legal exposure." He looked at me with the particular patience of someone who has considered every angle before speaking. "Claire is filing an emergency injunction on the patent registration and a separate fraud complaint with the FBI's Chicago field office. The fiancé designation gives me direct standing to assign my legal team as your representation, which bypasses the 6-week consultation timeline for new clients and gets you in front of a federal judge within 48 hours. I absorbed that. It was a chess move. Everything is a chess move. "And you want me to agree to the engagement publicly for the duration of the legal proceedings? It protects you. It gives me jurisdiction over the investigation without having to explain the details of our—" He paused, a fraction of a second, choosing the word carefully. "Association." My heart was moving at a pace that had nothing to do with fear. I kept my voice steady. And after the legal proceedings? He held my gaze. We'll discuss that after. I said, all right. He moved me into the west wing of his estate in Lincoln Park that same evening. The house was massive and quiet in the way that very old money tends to be, not ostentatious, but solid, every surface chosen for endurance. He assigned me a suite of rooms and had someone bring over a selection of my things from my apartment, clothes and sketchbooks, and the small collection of color reference samples I kept on my windowsill. I did not sketch that first night. I sat in the library, which was 2 stories high, with rolling ladders and a fireplace that took up most of one wall, and I let the reality of the day settle through me in stages. The theft, the handcuffs, the board's faces, Julian's performance, and then Dominic's voice cutting through all of it like a blade through seam allowance. If you touch my fiancé again. Day 3 of the arrangement, it rained. Not a light rain, a full Midwestern downpour that turned the garden outside the library windows into a gray sheet of moving water. Dominic came in around 9 in the evening wearing a charcoal t-shirt and dark trousers, no jacket, no suit. It was the first time I had seen him without the full armor of his professional presentation, and it changed something about the room's atmosphere. He was carrying 2 mugs of coffee, and he set one near me without ceremony. "Are you working?" he asked. I had my sketchbook open on the floor, a half-formed silhouette on the page that I'd been staring at for 20 minutes. "Trying." He sat on the floor beside me, not across, beside, close enough that I could see the exact angle of his jaw in the firelight. "Show me." I walked him through the concept, what had been lost, what I remembered, what I was trying to reconstruct from memory and grief, and the sheer determination to not let Julian Hart have the final word on what I was capable of producing. Dominic listened in that same total way he had in the penthouse. He asked where the silhouette wanted to go at the shoulder. He asked why the hem length I'd sketched felt uncertain to me. I answered him. I drew. He watched. At some point, the rain got louder and the fire burned lower, and neither of us moved to address either of those things. He picked up one of my pencils without asking, which should have annoyed me and somehow didn't, and extended a line I'd left incomplete exactly the direction I would have taken it. I looked at him. He was already looking at me. "You have good spatial instinct," I said. "I build things," he said simply. The kiss happened slowly, the way things happen when both people have been careful for too long. I did not overthink it. I did not catalog the implications. I simply turned toward him and let it happen. And his hand came up to the side of my face with a steadiness that felt like everything he'd held back across 3 careful dates finally having somewhere to land. When we separated, neither of us spoke for a moment. The rain was very loud. "The collection is going to be better than the original," I said finally. He looked at my sketchbook. "I know." At the office, Dominic was a different person entirely. Correct, formal. He moved through the Averly floors twice that week under the cover of the ongoing fraud investigation, and when we crossed paths, in the conference room, in the hallway outside the design suite, he treated me with the precise, courteous distance of a man who happened to share a corporate interest in the outcome of a legal matter. Nothing more. But twice, when a board member made a clipped remark in my direction, once about my lack of documentation and once about the reputational complication I had apparently created, I caught Dominic's eye from across the room, a single quiet nod. The kind of nod that means, I see it, and it has been noted, and they will know I have noted it. Julian, meanwhile, was everywhere, smiling for the internal communications newsletter, speaking to the buyers with my vocabulary, my references, my specific cadences of explaining construction. Every time I saw him, I kept my expression neutral and reminded myself that Claire Sutton was 2 floors below at any given moment, doing the kind of work that doesn't make noise until it's ready to detonate. Dominic's private security team, a unit I did not know he maintained for exactly this category of corporate intelligence, had been running forensic recovery on Averly's server architecture since the day of the lobby confrontation. What they found took 9 days to fully reconstruct. Julian had been approached 14 months ago by a representative of Chambord, a competing European luxury group attempting to establish a foothold in the North American market. The arrangement was structured as a three-part operation: access to an established designer's unreleased collection, documented destruction of that designer's credibility, and a clean patent registration that would survive cursory legal scrutiny. Julian had been paid $380,000 in 3 tranches through a series of accounts routed through Delaware LLCs. The fake HR logs had been generated using a purchased administrative credential. The fake text messages had been sent using a SIM spoofing service that mirrored my number. The restraining order was real, meaning it had been filed with actual court paperwork, but the supporting declarations were entirely fabricated. Claire walked me through the forensic summary on a Tuesday afternoon in Dominic's home office, precise and thorough, laying the documents across the desk in the order they would be presented. When she finished, she looked at me. "The FBI field office has issued a warrant," she said. "We're coordinating with the U.S. attorney on the corporate espionage charges. The patent registration will be voided. The restraining order will be dissolved." "How long?" I asked. "We want to wait for the Chicago Fashion Gala," she said. "Friday. Julian will be there presenting the collection publicly for the first time. We want it on record, in front of witnesses, with cameras running." I thought about Julian in the lobby of my own building, watching me get handcuffed with those wide, rehearsed eyes. I thought about the look on Margaret Holloway's face as she said we have to protect the company from liability. "All right," I said. "The Chicago Fashion Gala is held every October at the Art Institute, in the Grand Staircase Hall, where the enormous bronze lions stand guard at the Michigan Avenue entrance. The industry comes out in force: designers, buyers, editors, brand executives, photographers, and the kind of Chicago money that wears its influence quietly and watches everything. It is, in the terminology of the business, a significant room." Julian arrived early. I watched the media coverage from the car on the way there, my phone propped against the seat, the red carpet live stream open. He was in a perfectly tailored ivory tuxedo that I recognized instantly because I had spent 3 weeks designing its proportions. The cut at the shoulder, the single button closure, the absence of a breast pocket, which I had decided on specifically because the garment's line read cleaner without the interruption. He wore it like someone who had studied how to wear it, which, of course, he had. He'd been in my studio for 11 months watching me work. He smiled for every camera. He gave a brief quote to a correspondent from a major style publication about his vision for architectural restraint and the Midwestern interior. My words, my concept, my 6 months. Dominic, seated beside me in the back of the limousine, did not look at the phone. He was watching me. I set the phone down. "I'm all right." "He know you are," he said. He had dressed for the evening in a charcoal suit so dark it read almost black, with a shirt the color of raw silk, a color choice, I noted, that was not accidental. I had worn deep midnight blue, a piece I had constructed myself over the previous 2 days in the sewing room, working from memory and the new sketchbook, because I was not going to walk into this room in anything I had not made with my own hands. He looked at what I was wearing for a long, quiet moment when I came downstairs. He didn't say anything complimentary. He said, "Good," which from Dominic Vance I had come to understand as the highest register of praise. We arrived 40 minutes into the pre-dinner reception. I know how to walk into a room. I kept my chin level and my hands easy, and I let the conversation around us surface and break like water against stone. Dominic walked beside me, not in front, not behind, beside, and the room recalibrated itself around him the way rooms always do. People stepped back slightly. Conversations shortened. Eyes tracked. Julian saw us from across the cocktail space. His smile did not disappear, but something behind it did. I nodded at him politely across the room. He did not nod back. The dinner moved into the main hall at 8. The program was designed around a brief keynote from the gala's presenting sponsor before the evening's major award presentations. The presenting sponsor, as it had been for the past 4 years, was Vance Capital Group. Julian was at a table near the front, seated with the buyers and the two editorial directors who had been in the room when he presented my collection to the board. He looked composed. He had every reason to look composed. As far as he knew, the legal situation was stalled in preliminary filing stages. Claire Sutton was occupied with procedural motions, and tonight was the night he cemented his public identity as the designer behind one of the most anticipated couture collections of the season. The room settled. The lights shifted. The program director stepped to the microphone and introduced the keynote. Dominic walked to the stage. He is not a man who uses notes. He speaks from a complete, uncluttered command of whatever he is about to say. He thanked the gala committee, acknowledged the presenting partners, made one brief, genuine observation about the role of craft in an industry driven by speed. The room was warm. It was the kind of opening that moves people without trying to. Then he said, "Before we proceed to the award presentations, I want to share something with this room, because this industry deserves the truth before it extends any further credibility to a fraud." The temperature in the hall changed. He turned to the audiovisual technician at the side of the stage and the large projection screen behind the podium, which had been displaying the gala's logo, switched. The first slide was a bank transfer record, $130,000 from a Delaware LLC to a personal account registered to Julian Hart, dated 14 months ago. The room made a sound. This is the first of 3 payments made to Julian Hart by a shell corporation controlled by representatives of the Chambord Group, a European luxury conglomerate, Dominic said, in exactly the same tone he had used for the opening remarks. The payments were made in exchange for the theft of an unreleased couture collection belonging to the senior designer of Mason Averly, the deliberate destruction of that designer's digital documentation, the fabrication of HR records, the fabrication of text message evidence, and the fraudulent filing of a patent registration and a Cook County restraining order. The next slide, the recovered file metadata from Averly's servers, timestamps, the designer name attached to every original document. My name. The next, the forensic chain of custody showing the SIM spoofing service records. The next, the second and third bank transfers. The next, a declaration from the FBI Chicago field office confirming the criminal investigation and the issuance of a federal warrant. Julian stood up from his table. I do not know exactly what he intended to do, leave, object, demand the microphone. I will never know, because 3 federal agents who had been seated at the perimeter of the room for the past 40 minutes moved toward him simultaneously. One of them placed a hand on his shoulder before he had taken 2 steps. The cameras in the room, press cameras, phone cameras, the gala's own event coverage, were all running. Julian was arrested on the floor of the Art Institute of Chicago, in front of the full assembly of the city's fashion and business establishment, in the ivory tuxedo he had stolen in my hand. He did not go quietly, not loudly either. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene the way there is in films. He simply kept saying, very insistently to the agents and to the room in general, that there had been a mistake, that the documents were misrepresented, that he could explain. The agents moved him with practiced efficiency toward the side corridor, and the last thing I saw of him was his profile in the doorway. That same face I had watched across my studio for 11 months, the face that had looked at me with fabricated fear in a boardroom 3 weeks ago, now genuinely stripped of its performance, wearing the particular blank expression of someone who had just watched every carefully constructed plan collapse in under 4 minutes. The room erupted. I sat at my table and did not move. Margaret Holloway, 2 tables away, had her hand pressed over her mouth. One of the buyers had pushed his chair back from the table as if he needed physical distance from his own recent decisions. The 2 editorial directors were both already on their phones. Claire Sutton appeared at my shoulder. She placed a single sheet of paper in front of me. The patent invalidation order, signed that afternoon. The restraining order dissolution attached below it. "It's done," she said quietly. Dominic came off the stage, crossed the room, and sat back down beside me. He did not make a scene of the moment. He simply sat, and after a beat, picked up his water glass. "Are you all right?" he said. I thought about 12 years, 6 months, 9 days of forensic recovery, 3 secret dates, and a rainy night on a library floor. I thought about handcuffs in the lobby of my own building and the way he had looked at me across that space with something fixed and certain in his eyes. And the word fiancé landing like a shield in front of every person who had been willing to watch me go down. "Yes," I said. "I am." They brought him a car at 11, his, not one of the fleet, the quieter black sedan he used for evenings he wanted to close without an audience. The Art Institute steps were still busy with press and departing guests, and the peripheral chaos of a federal arrest being processed on the other side of the building. We left through a side entrance. In the car, the city moved past us in long amber streaks of streetlight. The partition was up. Neither of us spoke for the first several minutes, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people letting something very large settle into its proper shape. I said, "What happens now with Averly?" "The board will require restructuring. 3 members had documented awareness of the fraud and chose to act against you regardless. They will be removed. The editorial coverage will pivot within 48 hours. The arrest footage is already circulating." He paused. "Your name will be on the collection when it releases, the original attribution." And Shemboard. "The U.S. Attorney is coordinating with the Department of Justice on the corporate espionage filing. It's a federal matter now. It will take time, but it will move." I watched the lake appear briefly between 2 buildings, dark and wide and Chicago cold. "You planned every piece of this," he said, "from the day I walked into that lobby. You came because you already knew." He was quiet for a moment. Claire had flagged anomalies in the patent filing 3 days before the presentation. I came early. I didn't know it would be that morning. Another pause. "I didn't know they would put you in handcuffs." The way he said that last part, flat, controlled, with something underneath it that he had clearly spent 10 days keeping flat and controlled, told me more than a full declaration would have. I said, "The engagement." He said, "Yes." "Claire doesn't need the jurisdiction cover anymore. The federal case is filed. The injunction is granted." "No," he agreed. "She doesn't." The car slowed. I could see we were approaching the Lincoln Park estate, the familiar iron gates, the stone wall, the maples just starting to turn in the security lighting. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket. He held something between his fingers, something I couldn't fully see in the low light of the car until he turned it toward me. It was a ring. Not elaborate in the way of things designed to impress. Elegant in the way of things designed to last. A single oval diamond set low in a band of dark platinum, the kind of piece that doesn't need to announce itself because its quality is apparent the moment you see it. He held it with a steadiness that told me he had been carrying it for more than one night. "The fake engagement served its purpose," he said. "I don't want the fake one anymore." My chest had moved past the point where I could describe what was happening inside it with any coherent vocabulary. I kept my voice level. "You planned that too." "I've been planning it since the second date," he said, "when you explained the humidity differential in silk drape for 20 minutes and I couldn't look away from you." I exhaled. I extended my left hand. He slid the ring onto my finger with that same total steadiness he brought to everything. No fumbling, no ceremony beyond the weight of the moment itself. The cool platinum settling into place against my skin as if it had been made to live there. His thumb rested over it for a moment afterward, and I turned my hand to hold his. 12 years of discipline. 12 years of keeping my head down and my work above reproach, and my emotional life in a very separate, very quiet drawer. I was not someone who let things blur. I was not someone who allowed professional admiration to wander anywhere complicated. And then a man who speaks in a low, terrifying baritone sat on the floor of his own library in a t-shirt, picked up a pencil I hadn't offered him, extended a line on my sketchbook in exactly the direction I would have drawn it, and looked at me like I was the most interesting fixed point in any room he had ever occupied. The ring is real. The collection is mine. The case is filed. Julian Hart will answer for what he did in a federal courtroom, and the Chambord Group will spend the next several years learning what it costs to reach into Dominic Vance's portfolio and try to take something apart. And I am going to design. In a studio in Lincoln Park with good northern light and enough square footage to actually think, and a man who asks 4 follow-up questions about warp and weft tension and refuses to admit he enjoys it. I am going to build something that lasts. For the first time in longer than I can calculate, so am I. The end.